everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. We will open the room up at around the 40-minute mark to anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, good evening. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. Good evening from my side. Good morning. Happy April Fool's Day.
Oh, right. Oh.
There's no Volkswagen this year.
Oh, man, that was a year ago?
Yeah.
Goodness.
So how time flies. It's the last day of March and of the first quarter here in the U.S. Still a few weeks from spring, at least in my area. Shanghai is in lockdown. So Puxi is in lockdown today, starting today to be specific. And Pudong, I think, is getting out of it.
We should really quickly explain what Puxi and Pudong means. So there's a river that cuts through Shanghai, and it's called the Huangpu River. And Puxi means west of the river, and Pudong means east of the river. So literally that's what it means when it says there's two sides.
And the other way to look at it is Puxi is the older Shanghai and Pudong is the newer Shanghai.
Before 1995, Pudong didn't really exist. It was a swamp.
Yeah, that's why Tesla, if you remember, Giga Shanghai is in Pudong, Lingang. So they're having one extra day of shutdown today while the SAIC Volkswagen is starting its shutdown today because they're in Puxi.
Right.
So no disrespect to the Puxi people, but they were actually, at least on my WeChat moments, they were celebrating to the tunes of clubbing music with this 2D festival stream on the WeChat in anticipation of the lockdown. Shanghai people, they find ways to,
It's actually kind of sad. A couple of other things that I think about, because Shanghai is one of my favorite cities in all of the world. The Pudong skyline is iconic. The Bund is actually really pretty too, but they have two of the tallest buildings in the world in Pudong. And there's a nickname for Pudong among the Shanghai residents, the Laowai, or the foreigners. They call it Pujersey because after 8 p.m., everything just shuts down because it's more family-oriented. In Lujiazui, where the business district is, that's called the business district. It literally just goes quiet. And then Puxi is where the French concession is. Beautiful neighborhoods with tree-lined streets, nightlife for days, amazing restaurants. So it's actually, you know this, Lei, it's actually really jarring to see those photos on WeChat
videos
of Shanghai just being empty, right?
Yep.
You would never, ever see that in a normal day. There's always people on the streets, always mopeds, just like Beijing, just very, very hustle and bustle, right?
Yeah.
But Shanghai has energy levels that I've never felt in other cities, except for maybe Silicon Valley here and there, and like Tokyo, right? So anyways, just wanted to give my Shanghai friends a little shout out there.
Yeah, same here. Having been there, every other month almost back in the days, if not every other week. So CPCA, they're predicting weaker than expected March as far as EV sales are concerned due to what's been happening, not in Shanghai, but across China, basically. And we've seen, I just tweeted out Zeekr's numbers for March, and they specifically said due to the COVID outbreak and the supply chain issues that was affected, basically. And you can pretty much expect others to say similar things. I think we'll see more numbers come out maybe as we go on during the show. Maybe we'll see some other numbers. But yesterday actually was a very busy day in terms of product launches, right? We've seen the locally produced BMW X5L and the i3 sedan. The Hi-Fi launched the ZGT. So they're positioning it as a million renminbi GT. So they haven't even unveiled the Z yet. Now they come out with the ZGT. Photos only, and not the actual reveal. Not yet. So a couple of more price raise announcements, right? Voya officially announced the free, but they're giving it another month. So actually go up on May 1st. But they announced the price raise announcement today.
These guys are filling voids, right? Because this would be starting the lead up to the Beijing Auto Show this year. And so they're kind of reassessing, I think, and maybe trying to time it for the June reset of the auto show, which might still not even happen, right? And a couple of things that I did want to mention. So Zeekr, they've already told us they're going to be pretty low volume relative to their competitors this year, right? They're going to try to ramp, but if they're having problems getting parts at low production volumes, imagine the challenges of a Tesla, a GM, a Volkswagen, who they all ship, well, at least Tesla ships 500,000 cars, or going to be shipping 500,000 cars out of Shanghai this year. GM and Volkswagen are on different levels, right? Millions of cars. So if Zeekr, who is looking at 4,000 or 5,000 units a month, is having problems, you can imagine what the big legacies are dealing with. So
and so some more chatter on Neil's, William Lee's response to their plans of making smartphones. We can talk about that, and then just big news is the Vinfast, right? Their CEO was in Washington D.C. today. I think meeting with Jennifer.
It's that woman, right?
Yeah, forgot the name, but yeah. So big news. North Carolina, $4 billion plant. They're moving fast. And then Lotus Electra, right?
Yes.
And
then that got a lot of buzz, a lot of Twitter chatter. So
in
good
particular,
for them.
I think with the LiDAR setup, right? That was interesting, the deployable LiDAR, which itself has been in a lot of chatter because Li Auto teased more of the L9.
Yes.
Which is equipped with the same LiDAR that's on the Electra. And then Neil did a bit of marketing on their LiDAR with InnoFusion. So, and then the China EV100 forum last weekend, it was delayed from January, but people who might be familiar with the industry know that this is one of the premier conferences on EVs.
One of the premier, yep.
Yeah, usually held at the beginning of the year. I've been to quite a few of them back in the days. Always a lot of people, a lot of big shots attending and making big announcements and numbers. No different this year, except it's pretty much online. And then I guess that's pretty much the headlines. What do you want to talk about first?
Let's talk about the EV100 first, because I think getting people an understanding of how that came about and what it's all about, right? Because there are a number of meetings that you and I talk about regarding the Chinese government, and then specifically the automotive industry, and in this case, the electric vehicle sector, right? So maybe you can give a little background of the EV100 and.
Yes, similar during the beginning of the year, we talked about the 2 sessions a few episodes ago. The China EV100 is this semi-official entity, pulling these, government research, OEMs, suppliers. And this event is usually held in January, mid-January. It's usually right after the Detroit Auto Show, right around Detroit Auto Show time, mid-January. So and it's got the big shots, right? It's got the different ministerial level officials from the various commissions and government level organs. And then these CEOs, they will make a speech, all these breakout sessions on different topics. Part of it, I feel like it's a bit of, I will call it, people go there, is to give directions.
Yeah.
But also, for sure, it's kind of, marketing itself for your company. When you make a speech, it's you have to be there. And it was no different this year, right? So we heard right off the top, some of the numbers were given. I remember was this 80 million in NEV park, so the number of NEVs on the roads by 2030. This was given by Li Yizhong, the former Minister of the Industry and Information Technology. Huge numbers. And then Wang Chuanfu, right, he said March penetration was in the passenger vehicles, EVs was 28%. And he expects that to reach 35% by the end of the year. Right now, I think there's some confusion of whether that 35% represent the full year penetration or end of the year, right. Let's say November, December. I believe it's more end of the year, single month. I don't think it's going to reach 35% this year. But I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's rising, right?
I'm a bit pessimistic on some of these forecasts. I know the silver lining is that we're in March, so there's a lot of time to make up production that was missed in past months. And because January, February leading into March is notoriously slow for sales, I don't think they're missing out that much. But this is normally a time for those companies to build ahead a little bit, right? Some inventory, some buffer as demand rises throughout the year. And being boots on the ground here, Lei, I just don't know that we should be that confident about being able to hit 6 million units, not with things the way they're going. And I don't see this, whether it's the invasion, which creates the part shortages, or COVID that is shutting down plants willy-nilly 3-4 days at a time. I just feel that everything seems so unpredictable that it's going to continue to create challenges throughout the year. I think I saw an analyst or a consulting company actually take off about 1.5 million units from their global sales forecast for 2022 because of all the challenges that are happening in the world. And I didn't get to see how they broke down where the 1.5 million came out of, but China is the number one market in the world for vehicles, so it's got to be a disproportionate amount of sales that are getting missed here. So I'm guarded in my optimism.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, but Q1 is usually the low of the year, but March is usually the high of Q1. That's been a seasonality that's historically for years. So March is going to be much better than February for sure, but it's not going to be as high as expected, and we all know the reasons why.
Right.
And so now, I guess we look to Q2, and Q2 in the second half of the year where some of these new models are being delivered or are ramping up, and then you still face that, production crunch, and you would feel that the ramp up is not going to be as fast or high as it would be without the outbreak and
Sure.
without the right.
Yep.
So, but on the flip side, you have BYD now saying, their minimum is 1.5 million and shooting for 2 million. The overall market is what, 5.5? So it's a little bit mind-boggling, but we'll see the numbers. I think March numbers, they will probably be somewhat lower than expected.
Yeah.
So not going to be any, surprise.
Which is, and to your point about BYD talking about these crazy numbers, we just talked to a person, or I just was direct messaging someone who is in Shenzhen. She was supposed to send me something, and then I hadn't heard from her in 3 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks. She comes back on WeChat and she's like, hey, apologies. I wasn't able to send you this because I've been on lockdown in Shenzhen for the past 3.5 weeks. So it's really weird for BYD because, their main manufacturing is in Shenzhen, right? So for them to be able to still say with confidence that they're going to hit these record numbers is really mind-boggling, but I'm assuming he knows what he's talking about, obviously, right? So, which is confusing to me, right? Because if he's so confident, how's this happening? I guess is what I'm trying to figure out. So,
and then going back to the China EV100, the other thing that stood out was this kind of interaction between Li Auto's Li Xiang and the previous minister of MIIT, Miao Wei. It's free advertisement, free marketing for Li Xiang, which is basically the minister said he agreed that AEB should be standard requirement on all vehicles,
right.
Which is something that Li Xiang put out as a suggestion. So, and then Li Auto was like pushing that message to the media, say, hey, the minister agrees with us. On the other hand, Miao Wei, he also kind of took a swipe at, all the companies complaining about chips and, these shortages. And he's like, hey, look at these other global automakers. They're moving. They're taking moves. They're going upstream, right? So just don't stand there and complain. That was his other message. And then you have the Ouyang Minggao, which is a very prominent expert on the EVs. He was predicting that this supply chain, everything included chips, battery, could prolong for 3 to 4 years. So it will be something that industry will face for an extended period of time.
Dude, yeah. we've been saying that for the last 18 months, right? Or 12 months. So I told you guys last year, this is not a blip. This is not some 3-month thing.
No. And I'll tell you my favorite part, news or information that came out of my favorite speech, I guess, that came out of China EV100 is the speech by the founder and CEO of Horizon Robotics. He gave a very interesting snapshot of how OEMs work with these chip suppliers. And by chip suppliers, I mean the Qualcomms, the NVIDIAs, the Mobileye's. So Horizon Robotics, they're working with Li Auto, right? They have 2 chips in the Li 1, the 2021 Li 1. And they are planning to license the IP of their SoCs to the OEM so that they can support the OEMs to develop their own SoCs.
Right.
It's a very interesting move. And they're also announcing this Together OS. And he basically showed this, how the Mobileye model is basically, the BPU, which is a brain processing unit, the SoC, the hardware and software, that's all done by Mobileye, and then they just give it to the OEM, and the OEM does right.
It's like plug and play.
Yeah, and then the next level will be a different one. So what Horizon Robotics want to do is they want to offer this OS as well as the SoC licensing to the OEM, so they can develop their own chips, sort of.
So SoC stands for system on a chip.
On a chip,
that's basically. So there's graphics, there's memory. So
yeah, I mean he gave a very nice analogy of how in the PC age it was Wintel, right? In the smartphone age it was ARM and Android, and in the smart EV age, it's not so clear cut yet. What are the dominant kind of who and who, right? So, everybody's Volkswagen doing VWOS, Mercedes doing MBOS, right? And then there's a bunch of these chip suppliers. So there's no clear-cut winners there yet. So he's trying to...
So let's unpack that a little bit because, I do have that chip background for a little bit. One of the things that is very difficult because the irony of Horizon Robotics talking about working with the OEM and licensing IP to them is that the new CEO of Volvo effectively said this week that they needed to get their hands dirty, be in more control of the software, right? So think of it this way. Apple has a closed system. They control the hardware. They design the hardware.
Yeah.
They manufacture the hardware. Foxconn manufactures it on their behalf, but effectively they create the box that Foxconn plays in. And then they create the software. So they design, they code, and then they produce and manufacture themselves. And we could argue whether or not you're an Apple fan, but it is a pretty compelling user experience. Okay. Now with cars, and so the other side is not the Android side, but look at it from the Windows side to a Dell or an HP. It's kind of similar, right? And when you think of what William Lee said this week, we're going to get into phones, right? They want to control that UX up and down between the phone and the car, okay? And so that is the craziness of it, because if you want complete control so that you can have potentially the premier user experience, you need to own that yourself, right? And for automakers, that means creating or developing new skill sets really quickly. Obviously, a quicker way to do it is to partner, but then you lose a lot of control and a lot of design flexibility, because a Horizon chip might not be able to do X, Y, and Z. And so it'll be interesting to see what wins out from the standpoint of creating the best UX, right? Because at the end of the day, computing power is one thing, but as a customer, I don't really care about the back end stuff or what's under the hood. What I care about is my experience seamless? Is it delightful?
Exactly.
And am I going to be loyal to this? And so that's what I want to hear more of from these guys, because being partners is one thing, but having a good understanding of direction on where they want to take the software and the hardware and the experience. Those are kind of the three things, that and I'm talking at this 30,000 foot level, but I think most people understand that the customer doesn't care. It's just that, and we have to remember, you can have a great design and in theory, everything makes sense. But if the software that's running that doesn't work or it doesn't work well, your UX is going to suck, right? So that all needs to work together. And a vehicle is not like a mobile phone. A vehicle is almost like a human body. There are a lot of different systems that need to work together, right? In the human body, there's a respiratory system, there's the brain, there's the digestive system, that all need to work together, right? For us to be at our optimal. Cars are the same way, and mobile phones are simpler that way, right? Because the systems aren't as extensive. So anyways, I'm getting a bit wonky there.
No, this is perfect. What you just said is perfect to, talk about William Lee's comments. And he said it himself that it's easy to make a phone, but it's hard to make a good phone.
Yes.
And I think in that interview, he hinted, first of all, he sees Apple as a competitor, okay? And he hinted that this would be kind of a defensive play, whereas the Xiaomis and the Huawei's going into the smart EVs is a offensive play.
Yes.
So I feel like this is almost saying that, like the AR and VR glasses, right? So I'm going to add something to that, which would be kind of a smartphone. I think that's what he's hinting at.
Sure.
But whatever is being reported, he said it. We're in a preliminary market research.
I also believe William is trying to attach himself to Apple, right, and Neo to Apple,
sure,
so that when people think about Neo, they think about Apple, right, or vice versa. So he's trying to create that connection, which is great. Now, can he fulfill? That's ultimately the question, right? Because Apple has, from an ecosystem standpoint, they're the best in the business, right? Or one of the best in the business. So Yeah, they don't have a vehicle or a car, but that's not because they don't have partners that would trip over themselves to work with Apple. It's just that, and this is the weirdest part because Apple is normally very, very decisive, but
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see when they actually do put a car on the road, how it's going to work with the entire ecosystem that they have, right?
Yeah.
Hey, let's talk XPeng earnings.
Yeah, so XPeng earnings, I mean, again, I don't know what your thoughts are, but my thought is basically they just put more flag poles on the ground, right? So P7, they're expecting 10,000 units a month by the end of the year. P5 is approaching P7 delivery numbers. So right now it's about 6,000, 7,000.
Yep.
And G9, again, Xiaopeng, he's saying that it's a 5-seater mid to large SUV, which is the ES7 and the X5 that's just launched. More models next year, right? 4 models together with the Xpilot 4.0. And then I think to compare with the 3 companies that Xiaopeng sold the most last year, I think, but they lost the most money.
98,000 and change, right?
They lost the most money and they had the worst margins among the 3. Right? So I think Neo and Li Auto were both above 20%. I think they were just around, Xiaopeng was around 11%. Their Q1 guidance is the highest of the 3. But one thing, again, remember the P5 about a year ago this time when it was launched, when it was unveiled? The City NGP, we've been talking about this.
Yep.
They had that viral videos, right, showing what it could do in city driving conditions. But if you heard in the earnings call, they're still doing the last minute tweakings and waiting for approval before this can be used in certain cities. The first batch of cities will be pushed out, I guess, through the OTA in Q2. So the talking the talk is one thing, but walking the walk is another thing. So I'll say that we always treat these announcements with grain of salt, right? It takes a bit of time for the users to be able to use these functions. So I think that's pretty much their.
So let me add my 2 cents.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that 2021 was more from a financial standpoint. XPeng's margins were smaller because they rolled out the P5. The Li Auto didn't roll out anything, right? They just doubled down on the Li One.
Yeah.
And the ET7 wasn't really doing anything except in development. And so you would expect, because the L9 this year, the ET5 and ET7 this year, and then the ES7, that Neo's numbers on its balance sheet are going to weigh. And Li Autos are going to weigh down a little bit. And XPeng's going to get some of the benefit of launching last year. And a couple of things that I did want to mention, the P5 in Q4 of 2021 was over 50%, just over 50% of total sales for XPeng. So as anticipated, you and I anticipated that the P5 was going to be their high runner. So that's kind of played out.
Well, the P7 has been surprisingly strong.
Well, yeah, because first of all, it's a sedan, right? Because, but the EX3, you and I know this, it's a little long in the tooth. And they made like a mid-cycle enhancement to it, but not G3? Really. Or the G3, sorry.
G3i, yeah.
Yeah, so they upgraded it a little bit, but it was the first car that they launched, so it's a little bit older. And you see nowadays new cars, to be able to say that we're going to launch 3 cars in 1 year, that tells me that on the back end, there's a lot of part sharing and there's a lot of hardware and software sharing. Because 15 years ago, Lei, when car companies were talking about launching cars, they're not launching. I mean, you're Volkswagen size if you're launching 3-4 cars a year, right? You're GM size. And so for these little guys to be able to say, Neo, I'm launching the ET5, the ET7, and the ES7 during the pandemic and part shortage. So that's still really, really impressive. I'd love to be able to sit down with them and figure out, how does this work, right? How do you stack these together? Because we won't know whether or not being that aggressive is good or not for the next 12 or 18 months, right? Because once all those cars are on the road, we'll find out quality issues, we'll find out reliability, software bugs, and whether or not it paid off for them to do that so aggressively. So, but I did. So I mentioned last week that I was borrowing a Li One. I returned it yesterday. I actually didn't return it. Yeah, well, so
I thought you were going to take a trip. No, probably you can't take a trip.
So we're going to hike on Saturday. We're going to take a nice bike ride all in Beijing, as a family. But I'll be honest with you, Lei, it was expensive to park the car, right? Because I don't have a parking spot. So I had to pay for parking of this Li One. And it was like,
That's right.
It was like 500 kwai for like 3 days. And I was like, oh. And I couldn't drive out to Xunyi yesterday. So for those folks that don't know about this, Didi has this service called Daijia. And my contact at Li, he called the Daijia, means basically take me home, right?
It's like a designated driver service.
Yeah, this guy comes to my apartment right outside the parking garage, and he calls me, and I'm like, are you the Daijia? And he's like, yes. And so drives to Xunyi on my behalf, for me to drop the car off. So these are the kind of thing, because Xunyi at 3:00 in the afternoon is a good hour and a half away, or a good 60, 70 minutes away. And so use Daijia, and I'll write about it in the newsletter a little bit in more detail, but definitely very impressed with the fit and finish, the quality materials. Everything seemed very high quality. And I noticed this because I worked at Lear and we did interiors. So I know where the fake leather is. I know where the sound deadener is. I know where all these things are, the tracks for the seats. And so I can kind of understand and see, but everything seemed to be great. The kids loved it. The Li Xiang Tongxue, which is Li Auto's Nomi,
the AI assistant or something.
Yeah.
Voice assistant.
Did I tell you this last week? So my wife, she grew up here, right? Her accent is very formal, very Beijing. But the assistant didn't really understand her half the time, which was kind of funny. But then my son, who's 10 years old, in the back seat's like, and he's saying it super fast, right? Like, you got to say it slow. He's like, Li Xiang Tongxue, Li Xiang Tongxue. And so she's like, hey, what's going on? Person in the back seat, So he's like telling her what songs to play and stuff. So that was cool. A little clunky, the voice command, a little clunky. And then we tried out the autonomous features, the L2, on Third Ring Road near Lidu. Near the IKEA, right? Or that's Fourth Ring Road. I think that's Fourth Ring Road.
I used to live close by.
Yeah. So it gets like a parking lot right around there too, at certain times. And the L2 seemed to work pretty well. That was still pretty clunky, but I think the L9 is going to have major improvements to the ADAS features.
Yeah, it's got the Hesai AT128 and updated stack, hardware, software stack.
And so they are still planning to launch the L9 on April 16th.
Reveal.
Reveal. Yeah. If it's a live event, I'll be going. If not, I'll be virtual anyway. So I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah.
Probably hybrid or mostly virtual, I think.
Yeah.
With things that are going on. But pretty much, I think a lot of the launch or reveal events will go ahead, I think, because they're standalone anyways, irrespective of, the auto show, whether it's going to be held. So, for example, I think Smart is revealing the #1 next week. So these are all, ahead of the normal auto show time.
And Lotus did a great job with the Electra. Let's move on to that. China Twitter and China Weibo, I think, were pretty excited, pretty impressed. British Twitter was like, half of them were like, oh my God, why would they do this? Why would Lotus build an SUV?
I mean, it's obviously the answer is China.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the fact of the matter is, Lotus wasn't a very well run company, and the cars that they built were very niche. Right, the market for them was very small. Love the friskiness of the brand and what it stands for, but if Porsche is best selling cars or SUVs, if Lamborghini's building an SUV, if Aston's building an SUV, Bentley, Rolls Royce, all building SUVs, guess what? In order to survive, you got to get these high runners going, right? And, design wise, I think it looks pretty distinctive relative to what else is out there, right?
Yeah.
So,
I think that the first chatter was first impressions and a lot of talk, on it being looking like Zeekr and Urus, Lamborghini Urus. That was a Chinese Twitter.
and they would be right.
Yeah, and then use of LiDAR, obviously, two different LiDAR suppliers, RoboSense and Hesai, right? I think that's the first. 4 LiDARs, that's a lot. And 4 deployable LiDARs at that. So, to make sure the aerodynamics still works. But I'm not sure that's a good thing in terms of dust and moisture,
Right.
Those type of things collecting. But
so what we know, Lei, is that sound systems and LiDAR are qualifiers now for Chinese mid-premium, near premium to premium vehicles.
Yeah.
These are qualifiers.
I mean, aside from the upcoming XC90, which has the Luminar LiDAR, I think this is one of the first, it's owned by Geely, but it's still a pretty, it's got over 70 years of history as a iconic British brand, right? Sports car brand. Now, being very progressive with 34 sensors, the latest sensors.
Yeah.
What is LiDAR, radar, or the cameras.
And I'm sure you saw the green that they came out with yesterday. There's a green interior and green exterior that they came out with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
and it's the first first Lotus to be produced in China. So, that's just
you and I have some friends at Geely, so I'm bugging one of them. Unfortunately, he's more focused on Zeekr, he told me. But this is one of those things, Lei, that if it wasn't for COVID and you were here, we'd be visiting these places every month, right? Like, hey, man, check it out. We signed NDAs, so we couldn't say anything, but, just to visit these guys, because they want to know too, right? I think we have a decent amount of respect from a lot of the industry folks here and in the US and Europe. So I'm sure they want to hear our opinions too, right? So
yeah. I the one thing I didn't expect, I know this, SUV is not a surprise, but what I didn't expect is exactly this sensor setup that it's out of this world. It's like a Chinese smart EV startup would do to put all these sensors on there.
But I go back to your point about talk the talk, walk the walk. If you're going to have 34 sensors for LiDAR, that's the promise. Does the software and hardware software stack and ADAS system fulfill that promise?
Yeah, that's why also on Chinese Twitter there's been this kind of but debate going on. The Li Auto L9 and the Neos, couple of models, 3 models now, all with LiDARs, and they're trying to compare, which LiDAR has the best feature or has the most number of lines, laser. But you don't really compare it that way because you have to look at holistically, right?
Yeah.
Of what the intended functionality that you want to achieve with these type of sensor setups. And that's why I can go back to the Mercedes Drive Pilot using just the one in the grille, because they want to achieve L3 on the divided highways going at under 40 miles per hour. And that's enough for that type of situation. Whereas the Chinese smart EV startups, they're all, saying, we're going to do, city level L2 driving. That's why we have these sensors and it's going to do this and do that. And that requires obviously more, right, in terms of quantity.
You hit the nail right on the head. Like the Chinese EV startups, and in this case, Lotus a little bit, is their answer is just more. It's not better. It's just more, because, at the end of the day, what you should get out of 34 sensors is enough redundancy so where that there is no blind spots in the vehicle, right? And so, to your point, right, it's not about how accurate or how far this LiDAR looks out, because that's just one sensor. And if that sensor doesn't work because it's dirty, because it's this, because it's that, then do the other systems or the other sensors make up for it, right? Because, that's the redundancy part. The other thing, Lei, unless you want to keep on talking about Lotus, is I'd like to talk about the too simple thing, because I think that's pretty important, and it's an indicator for the China-Fornia companies as to how they might sort themselves out between their US and China operations.
Yeah, and Baidu just put out a statement today, right? On the related to this issue.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's a, all of these China-Fornia companies, they're going to have to go through what Too Simple is going through, basically.
So a little bit of background. Too Simple it's a China-Fornia company based in San Diego, based in Beijing, and they went IPO. They're a commercial trucking, autonomous vehicle company, and they do long haul trucking. And they IPO'd last year, and unbeknownst to us, CFIUS was investigating them because of the data transfer between and the code transfer between the United States and the Chinese teams. Mm-hmm. So it looks like
one of the shareholders of Too Simple is a company under Sina. They have a 20% stake, and I think Charles Cao, the Sina, he's the chairman. I think he's one of the members. Mm-hmm. Board members, I believe, and I think one of those agreements with CFIUS was that he had to, step away, and then a lot had to do with their China entity, and also one of the founders, Chen Mo, who used to be the chairman, but now it's Xiaodi, right, Hou Xiaodi. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But the chairman Chen Mo, I mean, he's in China, and he started a company in July that was trying to kind of move into the truck assembly. So they're doing something with the China entity. It's a complicated process, but what I'm hearing is from the Chinese press is that it's being sold. One of the bidders was CITIC. No, not CITIC, the CICC, Zhongxin.
Yes.
Which will buy it for like $1 billion, and then somehow Chen Mo will buy it back and retain the team. And operate
the China team. He's talking about the China team, just
right?
The China team,
and then have it operate independently. So,
and they're trying to get $1 billion for the China team.
Yeah,
and so you and I knew this. So there's two things going on here that I think is worth tracking that I'll mention. The China-Fornia companies, what we are referring to is Momenta, Pony, WeRide, AutoX, Deep Route. They're all startups. Too Simple actually went IPO. So they were a publicly traded U.S. company with major operations in China, a technical team in China. And so China last year, the Chinese government had banned the export of data, Chinese data, and to anywhere else in the world. And so the U.S. government was was asleep at the wheel a little bit during the last administration, but they've quickly woken up to these concerns as well. And Europe is the same way. And so in order for them to IPO, Too Simple had to make some of these agreements, had to agree with some of these things. And I don't know the specific details, but it looks like they had to separate themselves from their China operations. So each of these China-Fornia companies is going to have to deal with the same thing. In this case, Too Simple was trying to generate revenues from the United States entity and the Chinese entity. But the other companies, I think with the exception of Pony, which has paid services in Irvine, California.
I saw that. I saw one of those vehicles when I was there last month.
Yeah. So there was an article I read that basically said they're in these other China-Fornia companies are in a different situation because they're all just trying to generate revenue in China. Well, the exception is Pony. Pony's also trying to straddle both regions. So,
yeah. And the fact that Too Simple is right, they're listed. They're the first listed AV company ever. So
they snuck in. They snuck in, right?
Yeah, they're under a bit of a more scrutiny.
Yeah, and so the fact of the matter is, and these are facts. I've spoken with enough of these guys. They're none all these the capabilities of the Chinese machine learning and AI talent here is really good, but it still doesn't match what's coming out of the United States. Tsinghua is an amazing university, technical university, but it doesn't have the depth yet. And so most of these founders, and you know this, Lei, most of these founders get their PhDs from Western universities, namely a Stanford or Carnegie Mellon, and Deep Route, Maxwell, he went to UT Dallas, right? And so which begs the question, right? Okay, does that make the US entity of Too Simple in 5 years from now a lot better, from an algorithm and system standpoint, better than the Chinese counterpart that is now separated and supposedly has nothing to do? I don't know, maybe, but they'll tell you, these guys will tell you the depth in the United States of talent is much, much better than it is in China. So it'll be interesting to see because China is going to have the data, right? The United States doesn't have, they're not as many pilots, and there's just not as much going on from a data standpoint. So,
and the competition is a bit different when you talk about Too Simple, as far as what they're trying to achieve in the US versus what they're doing in China.
Yes.
It's a bit different. Here, it's all about long haul. But in China, it's more like what they were doing was
in ports and stuff like that.
Yeah, so very fixed, limited area of operation. It's a bit different.
And the other interesting thing, Lei, is that some of these companies, these startups, like a Too Simple, they had, I believe, before they went IPO, about 70% of their investors were Chinese money, right?
Yeah, right.
And so Pony is much more Western money, right?
Right, Toyota.
So, yeah. Right. So
WeRise got Nissan Alliance invested into them.
Exactly. So everything is not equal from that standpoint. Right, so how they're treated shouldn't be equal either, right? It should be on a what's the right word to say? I forget. On an individual basis, they should be evaluated, right? So, but I think that's the direction that these autonomous vehicles are going. And perhaps that's the reason why a Waymo has not entered China. Perhaps that's a reason an Argo hasn't entered China, because they knew there was a good chance that they would have to separate themselves somehow, some way, right?
There's already too many players in China anyways.
Yeah.
Right, there's just one new autonomous trucking company that was formed recently. I forgot the name, but it's fairly new. It's almost like the Inceptio.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
That type of. I mean, there's yeah.
Well, and there's always going to be that likelihood that co-founders have falling out, and then they separate themselves from the company and then start something themselves, right? So
Maxwell himself is a good example.
I see that happening in China, just because, like you said, there's so many competitors, right?
So some of the Pony AI people, I think, left, maybe moving to finding another company. Things like that, happens.
Well, that XPeng guy left for NIO, right?
For NIO, yeah.
So it reminds me of Germany and Detroit, because I've worked for GM and Ford. I have brothers and sisters that have worked for all three companies, right? GM, Ford, and Chrysler, or FCA, or Stellantis, or whatever you want to call it. So, the automotive sector and the AV sector is just an incestuous kind of bunch, right? People will jump back and forth to companies. So Oh, we didn't get a chance to talk about VinFast, Lei.
That's your
Yeah. So
that's,
VinFast, I'll quickly summarize. Started in 2017. Vingroup is the parent company that owns them. Vingroup was started by the richest man in Vietnam. So Vingroup made him the richest man in Vietnam, and they do real estate, they do grocery stores, they do banking.
How much GDP do they account for the Vietnamese economy?
Oh,
right?
I don't know. I'll answer that next time.
It's a big number, I think. Yeah.
But he started VinFast in 2017. They started building petrol engine vehicles, and a lot of you probably know a few of the guys, Lei. A lot of the guys that started VinFast or helped start VinFast were ex-Shanghai GM guys from Shanghai that moved over to Vietnam to launch the brand. Jim DeLuca, I think he's ex-Shanghai GM, and a few other guys. They're based in Haiphong or Hanoi, so the capital of Vietnam in the north. And so last time I was there, I got into one of their petrol vehicles. Wasn't that impressed. But Vietnam is Southeast Asia, so those cars, the level of quality is going to be a lot different than something you'd see in China or the United States or Germany or Europe. But when President Biden tweets about the agreement that was made between a company and the state of North Carolina, it's a big deal. $4 billion, should begin production in 2024. It's going to include a battery cell manufacturing. Phase 1 is going to be 150,000 units. They're going to build 2 cars, a midsize SUV called the VF8. It's an EV that's going to start around 40 grand. And then a larger SUV called the VF9 that'll start around 55 grand. And they have headquartered themselves in Los Angeles. So it's a pretty cool story how aggressive they were to actually beat China EV Inc. to the United States market.
I think it's just been fast and furious. Ever since they debuted at the LA Auto Show, they've been making these announcements almost nonstop. And what I feel is that they really haven't even established the brand yet, right? And they're already announcing
a $4 billion commitment. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's...
And not only that, but they're also doing the Neo thing with battery leasing. So
yeah.
How's that going to work out? I don't know, right? Because are they going to swap? Is that, I don't think that's clear yet, right? Maybe they're going to work with Ample.
Yeah, whereas I think, let's say, using Neo as an example, they're probably much more, I would say, established, but a lot more people probably know more about Neo than VinFast.
Yeah.
I feel.
For sure. Well, remember that they're trying to build up that IPO valuation, right?
Right.
So
it's just too much going on.
Yeah, they plan on IPOing at the end of this year. So maybe they felt they needed to get all this in order to bump that valuation to its maximum position. I'm really impressed that North Carolina has been able to recruit a lot of these clean tech automotive entities, right? So I don't know enough about what's going on. I just found out over a couple of days, just doing a bit more research on what's going on in North Carolina with VinFast. But I will say this, VinFast is talking to everybody. I've gotten people asking me about VinFast and about people they need to hire, what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. But it's an exciting time for them. But to Lei's point, they've barely made any cars and they're going to build a second factory now.
So I'll let you in on a little scoop. So this WeChat guy, he pinged me. He's a electronics supplier. I don't know where I met him. Well, probably one of these conferences. He pinged me and he basically said a lot of Chinese suppliers to VinFast, and they were being quoted to supply VinFast for something, and he was telling me that VinFast quoted too low, so it never happened.
Took a pass.
So, a lot of Chinese suppliers, but I don't know how it's going to go when they, produce in the US.
I'll say this, they're going to have to partner a lot in order to hit the timelines they're looking at, right? Because the electric vehicles that they have, they're not in production yet. So they're still developing them. That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.